Well, friends, it is time for us to start. And so I want to welcome you to the first of our monthly webinar chats based on the new book, which I'm so excited came out last month. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you who already bought the book. Are there folks on here that have bought the book and have started to read it? Are there folks on here that haven't yet started to read it or haven't yet bought it? Just let me know in the chat box. The chat box is a great way to sort of communicate to each other and to me. So Kimberly says she's waiting for her copy to arrive, have read the first few chapters, just the introduction, terrific. Okay, so lots of folks in different stages of interaction with the book. So here's what it looks like. The picture on the cover is, of course, those of you who are familiar with the Worship Design Studio, that is a picture of the Worship Design Studio, where for the last almost 9 years now, I have been coaching folks, helping to train your volunteers, creating worship series to jumpstart you in creating what I call good worship, meaningful and memorable worship. It has taken me years to be able to get around to writing the book, which actually takes all of my theories that I've been teaching for a very long time and honing as I work with congregations and worship teams. And it's taken me a long time to have actually the time to sit down and write it. But I did that this spring, and I'm so glad that I was able to do it. About 8 years ago, I asked myself the question, who are the most amazing storytellers of our day? And my answer to myself was filmmakers. I think there are some filmmakers who are doing extraordinary work, who are bringing deeply human themes into a form that we can really connect with them. And that's exactly what we do in worship, right? We take this amazing story, this faith narrative, and we say, how can we bring that alive for folks? How can we create messages that people won't forget once they walk out of the door? So as I, began to think about, well, what can we learn from filmmakers that would help us with the messages that we as worship designers and leaders tell year in, year out? What could they help us with? I began to talk to filmmakers. I began to read books about filmmaking. I just began to research. And, part of my ministry is research. I love to teach. I love to lead worship. I love to design worship. All of those things. My first career was in professional theater and dance. And so part of me is a performer, right, from that. So I love to bring those messages alive, but I also love to research because I believe wholeheartedly that there are ways that we can learn from other fields to help us do what we do better. So I began to investigate what it would be like to find out more about how filmmakers bring a story to life. Now, I did at Filmmakers. You might think that I would go to theater first, as an example or as an analogy. And there are a lot of ways we can draw analogies to theater. But what I found is that not everybody goes to the theater, right? Some people do. Some people were raised in that. Some people weren't raised in that. Some people have never been to a play or a live musical theater piece. But everybody has gone to see movies, right? So I thought, what an accessible analogy this would be if I could actually find things that helped. And I'll tell you what, it didn't take me long. It did not take me long to find some really helpful analogies from filmmakers. So I have been teaching this in my workshops for many years now. And what I found is that we could watch a very short clip from a movie and we could draw some analogies that would really help us. Now, it's true that some of the analogies that help us are actually the finished product. But what I soon found was that the process of creating the product, creating the production, creating the film was also very, very helpful in terms of understanding how teams work and how planning worship in a team works. Many of you already know that I'm a big advocate of planning together and planning ahead. That's my mantra. So wherever you are, in your living room, in your kitchen, in your office, say it with me, plan together and plan ahead. That's my mantra. And, planning ahead is good stewardship of the planning together part, right? So if we want to get people on board to help us be part of a team, we want to do it in a way that makes the process life-giving and fun and affirming and not stressful for folks, because there's way too much stress in our lives and in the world to add to that stress, right? So finding a way, and I unabashedly in the book call it production, right? Production is this whole conversation about worship as entertainment, not, or it's not entertainment. I think it's just not a very helpful conversation. No, worship is not entertainment. Ritual happens when a body together worships, not just spectators looking at something that's being done at them or to them. But it's when we all participate in it. But it is, in fact, a production in that we have to produce certain elements. And we want to produce them well because if we don't, that distracts from the message. So I really want you to hear this clearly in terms of this think like a filmmaker analogy. We're not trying to make worship into something that it's not, into something that is like a film that's entertainment, that's pure entertainment. The analogy is not about making worship like film. It's about learning from filmmakers what we can about telling a story really well and about the ways that people are drawn into a story. So much to learn, and I hope that those of you who started to dig into it are enjoying that analogy, and I hope that you will never watch a film the same way again, right? My spouse, Jordan, laughs all the time. It's like when we're at a movie at home, I don't do this in the movie theater, but when we're watching a movie at home, I'll be like, pause. Did you see how they did? I'm just constantly analyzing it because these lessons are so important to us. Those of you who just popped on, I'm just beginning to introduce folks to the book and sort of the background of the book and the delight that it was for me to talk to filmmakers, to learn about filmmaking as a way of helping us as worship designers and leaders to bring the greatest story ever told alive. Now, the subtitle is Sensory Rich Worship Design for Unforgettable Messages. So sensory rich is a word, a phrase that I've been using for a very long time. We've been talking multi-sensory worship for many, many years, a couple decades, more than a couple of decades. But one of the reasons why I use sensory rich is because when we say multi-sensory, oftentimes we've been just talking about, let's make sure we have words and images and music and actions, but they don't always necessarily get to play together. We will have a scripture and then we'll sing a song. And one of the things that I have been trying to do is to talk about what it means to layer, this term layering, what it means to layer the senses into a sensory-rich moment. So in other words, I want to take the words and the music and the visuals and the action out of their separate sandboxes and put them in the same sandbox and let them play together. Now, this is something that movies do, right? It would be ridiculous. We would think this is a ridiculous movie if we sat there and we listened to some dialogue for a little while from a talking head. And then we sat there and we just watched some scenery for a little while in silence. And then we heard some music. What filmmakers do is they say the way that we use music is to set the tone or the feel for a moment. What a great question when we ask ourselves what hymn or song needs to be connected to this scripture, for instance. We don't ask it just to plug in something that everybody knows or to just plug in something that has the right words, but the feel of the music, we don't take that into consideration. What filmmakers help us understand is that in any one given moment, the choices that we make have to be really super intentional. So if the scripture that we're reading has a contemplative tone about it, what we want to do is connect that to a piece of music, perhaps, that has a contemplative tone and also words that support that message. And perhaps the pianist begins to play that underneath the reading to set that tone. And then we can go right into the singing of it as soon as that reading is over. So you see, we layer those things on top of each other. We have two things going on at once. Maybe let's imagine as well that the scripture that we're using has to do with something, the analogy of being beside still waters. All right, I bet you can guess what scripture that's from. Then we might decide that we'd like to have a picture of some still waters on our screens, right? Or maybe it's a video. Now, what we want to make sure is that the video is of a nature where the waves are maybe gently rolling in a slow way rather than fierce crashing, right? So all of these are just an example of being intentional in figuring out how all of the worship arts are pointing toward that message. Because when that happens, friends, we get unforgettable messages. Here's the neurobiology behind that statement. What we know about brains, and I'm a neuroscience geek, which is you'll find as you read the book. I like to really draw in especially things from cognitive science that help us understand how messages get embedded in us, because that's what we want in worship, is we want those messages to be so memorable that we take them outside of the time and place of worship and we live with those messages. So what we know about the brain is that the more things that fire off, the more areas of the brain that fire off around any one message, the more likely we are to remember it. And so when the music and the words and the visuals, and even perhaps an action, let's say that as a response to the sermon, we get to go touch that water in some way, remember our baptism, and we add an action to that. When all of those things are firing off in our brain, because each one of those senses has a different part of the brain attached to it, the more likely that message will be what we call unforgettable, right? We'll carry it outside of the worship moment. So that's sort of an unpacking of the title of the book. Think like a filmmaker, sensory rich worship design, and I use design intentionally because it is an artful endeavor. It is a special kind of art. It's not art for the gallery. It's not art for the concert hall. It's not, we don't write words just for the page. We write them to be spoken and sung and seen and heard and felt by living congregations to participate in. But it is an artful endeavor. And in the introduction, I talk about the fact that you are a ritual artist. And I hope that you're beginning to see yourself that way. It's really important to me. And it's why when you go check out worshipdesignstudio.com, you'll see the rotating room. You'll see the worship design studio there. And it's a sanctuary that is tricked out to look like an artist studio with all of the different art forms having their place to create. Because I want you to really understand yourself as an artist. Because when we see ourselves as artists, we create a worship experience that's not just like the agenda to a meeting. It is an experience from beginning to end of a story. And that's why the analogy to filmmakers became so palpable and wonderful. Okay, so that's a little introduction to the title. Now, every time we do one of these monthly webinar chats, we're going to do two things. One is I'll spend the first few minutes talking about some of the things in the book, like I'm doing now. And then I'm going to open it up for questions or comments because I want this to feel like an opportunity to connect with me since we're live. And if you ever want to have a question addressed by me, feel free to send that to me in an email to marcia@marciamcfee.com, and I will include it in the next webcast. I'll be uploading these to my YouTube channel so that even if you can't be present, you can have your question answered on these webcasts. So let me just turn to the next slide. I'm going to talk about a little bit about chapter 1 on this first webinar, and we'll kind of work our way through the book on these monthly webinars. And so I want to talk just a little bit about conceptualizing the story, and then I'm going to open it up to questions and comments. Be sure that you put your questions and comments in the chat box, and Jenna's going to be taking a look at those and saving those for when we open it up. So at any point you can put your questions or comments in the box, and we'll get back to them. So I want to talk about chapter 1 first, especially because I think that this is one of the most important places to start. We don't start simply already thinking about, okay, what are we going to do for Sunday? What's the anthem? What's the songs? What's the scripture? What I want us to do as we think like filmmakers is to back up in time, uh, especially backdating, looking further ahead than we might normally do in order to look at a whole season, a liturgical season, or a series, all at once, so that we move away from one-hit wonders to looking at series. Now, in chapter 1 of the book, I really talk a lot about why I think series are a good idea. I think it's a good idea just in terms of our memory making. It's a good idea in terms of our evangelism. It's a good idea in terms of our spiritual journeys, our spiritual growth as a community. I just think there's a lot of great reasons to do it. Now, I want to be sure that you know that creating in series is not antithetical to lectionary preaching. So if you are hard and fast revised common lectionary follower or narrative lectionary follower, or there's many lectionaries out there now, this applies to you as well. Whenever we have a starting point, and that for you would be a starting point, what we want to do is look at a series of services and see what kind of thread do we see throughout that can help us have a journey over a few weeks' time that helps us to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into that story. Now, this is perhaps more like akin to a television series, let's say a National Geographic series on whales. All right, so perhaps there's 3 parts. It's a 3-part series, and the first series we get into, the lifetime of whales and where whales are in the world, and maybe the second one we're talking about their incredible communication techniques, and maybe in the third one we're talking about the danger to them in terms of extinction, that kind of thing. So it's all about whales, but it's going to be different for each one. But if I came in on the third one and that's the only one I watched, I'd still be able to watch it with a deeply satisfying experience because it's not based or reliant on the 2 that came before it. So series, while they are connected, they also are standalone. And I hope that's clear to you. So let's say in the third Sunday of a series, you might, as you introduce that theme, you might quickly say in the first Sunday, we talked about Jesus' connection with this group of outsiders. Let's say this is The Outsiders, which is our newest series in the Worship Design Studio. And in our second one, we experience Jesus connecting with this group. Today, et cetera, et cetera. So it's always congregational friendly, understanding that people might not have been there before, and yet that doesn't deter us from creating a spiritual journey over time in a series kind of way. So I'm not going to go over all the reasons why I think series are great, because I want you to read that in the book. I've said it much better in the book than I can right now. But suffice it to say, I believe that series help us see deeper, see any spiritual topic that we're dealing with in a deeper way, because we get to sit with it for a while. Now, discerning the direction is something that I talk about in the first chapter. As we discern the stories that we are to tell, and it's all about stories, right? Stories are the way that humans have always helped to make sense of their world, make sense of their experiences, make sense of their relationships. As we discern the stories that we believe our congregations will be enriched by, we see the incredible role of what I call the visionary. Now, the visionary is the lead pastor or pastors, depending on the size of your church. And it all starts with you. Pastors that are on here, it all starts with you. The whole process, just like the whole process of making a film starts with a screenwriter and a director and a producer saying, this is an important message for our day. We want to get this out there. They decide that's the direction we want to go. before they even get the rest of the team together. Before anything else, there's a decision made that this is a worthwhile story to be told. So visionaries, pastors, what I recommend in the book and in the Worship Design Studio is that you set apart some time to really discern. Put yourself in a place that's inspirational to you. I'm sitting out here in my outside office. This is often where I get inspired. I get myself out of my office, my inside office, because that's where all my papers and books and files and everything are. And sometimes that can feel, it's hard for me to vision in that place. That's where I'm doing, right? So that's a very doing place of my process. So when I am envisioning what perhaps I'm going to be thinking of for the next series in the Worship Design Studio, when I am visioning how I'm going to teach a workshop, or when I am beginning to design a worship service, I'll put myself in a place that feels inspirational. And that's why I wanted to do this webinar out here in my aspen grove. So find a place that's inspirational to you. Set apart time and space. So going away is a really good thing to do. Now, some of you will want to go away by yourselves. I happen to be somebody who is right on the cusp of the introvert and extrovert part of the scale, which means that there are times when I need to go inward and be by myself to discern and sort of start that creative surge. But then I also really value brainstorming with others. So the more you can know about yourself and your own creative process, the better off you'll be in terms of getting the most creativity out of the time that you have. And that's one of the main goals of writing this book, is to help you get a process and discern the best process for you. A creative process is a container, a structure in which you will come up with your best stuff because it is helping you be accountable to time, and it's also helping you ease the stress of the entire thing, because it helps you know, okay, this I do first, which helps then to do this, which is next, which also helps then to do this, which is next. Once you get a process in place, you will find that your anxiety will lower because you know that the process is working for you. Most of us went to seminary, and I would say that some were lucky enough to have worship professors who were able to integrate creative processes and how you actually design a worship service into a semester of teaching about worship, where you have to get the history and the theology and the ritual study, all of these theoretical pieces. They're absolutely important to learn in seminary. But what happens often is that then we are not sure exactly, when it gets down to it, nitty gritty on the ground, how do you do it? How do you put it together? And so many of us are just relying on the creative processes that maybe we saw somebody else do. And a lot of that comes down to what I call plug and play. We start with an order of worship and we just plug and play the pieces. And then what we get at the end is something that feels more like an agenda to a business meeting than a spiritual journey that is artful. So from my background in the arts and from these conversations with filmmakers about their production schedule and how things get put together, because they've got a ton of people who they have to coordinate. You know, they have art directors, they have cinematographers, they have composers, they have all these people. And how do they create a structure, a container for that creative process to then actually have something fruitful on the other end and on time? Because, you know, Sunday will come around. It will come around. Sunday will come around and you have to do something, right? People will show up. So we are working under deadlines. So the very first thing, however, is discerning that direction and going off visionaries and discerning. I suggest 6 months at a time. So go in August or September and look at Advent through Pentecost. Discern the direction, the series titles. Discern what scriptures that you're using. If you're not following a lectionary, how are you discerning what that scriptural journey is? How is that thematic journey going to come out, i.e. what are titles for the worship services? Those are the kinds of things that you're going to create for that 6 months. So in August, September, you may be dealing with what's an Advent Christmas series, then Epiphany, what I call Epiphany Plus in the Worship Design Studio, the Epiphany and the Sundays after leading up to Ash Wednesday, Lent and Holy Week, Easter season, right, which is Easter plus the next 7 weeks ending in Pentecost. So you've got about 4 series that you're working with on that visionary retreat. Then you would go again in January, February, and look at all of ordinary time, which is half of the year, right? Pentecost to the next Advent. Now, while we're on that, I want to let you all know that every year in August, September, October, I hold worship planning retreats to help people who really want a jump start and a guide in this kind of planning. We have 3 this year. The first one is in Kennebunkport, Maine in August, end of August. These all start on Sunday night and go to Wednesday noon. We try to do them in different parts of the country, so you can go to the closest one to you, although we have people flying in from all over to these. But that's August 28th through the 31st in Kennebunkport, Maine. Beautiful spot, right in Kennebunkport. September 25th through 28th, we're going to be in the Blue Ridge Mountains in a gorgeous place, Clayton, Georgia. We try to be near water in every one of these, so they have this gorgeous lake there in the Blue Ridge Mountains. That is very close to Atlanta, close to many airports. It's about 4 different airports that it's close to. And then October 16 through 19, here in Tahoe, where I live, in a Presbyterian retreat center that we use every year that's absolutely gorgeous, right on the lake. So that's a Sunday night through Wednesday noon. And what I do is every session is part of the liturgical year. And I walk you through those. I give you tons of ideas. But the point is that half of every session is your working retreat. So out of all of the inspiration I've given you, then you discern what is the right series, the right story, the right message for this year, this community. It may be one that we have in the Worship Design Studio. It may be one that you completely make from scratch. It may be one that you make because you've been inspired by a song that we sang in our time of introducing the season. It's many different starting points. But every session we go through, and so by the time you leave, you have some real concrete plans to help jumpstart your process for the entire year. Now, that's exactly what in the book that I suggest, and that is that you come up with these overarching themes. You let the rest of your team know when you get home, because one of the most important parts of the creative process is steeping in it in the back part of your brain. In other words, knowing that already, when you come back in September, knowing already what your theme is for Lent, you can begin to see through that lens, and you will find stories and examples and images and visuals and things that you can begin to just casually collect, so that when you begin your actual production schedule for Lent in the next year, you pull all those things out and you're not starting from scratch. All of a sudden, you've had people helping you and seeing things about that series leading up to it. And so you just hit the ground running. So discerning the direction, pitching the story, and casting the vision are ways that you then get the rest of the team on board. Getting the team on board is about helping them to see the inspiration that you felt when you decided on that direction. In the first chapter, I talk about writing synopses. And writing synopses is akin to what a screenwriter does in a film production, only they call it log lines. And it's really about 3 or 4 sentences that describe what the series is about. You'll see this when you go onto your app on your phone, you're looking for a movie to go see. It'll show you the plot, right? That's a log line. Now, oftentimes log lines, as film directors are producing the film, will get tweaked a little bit so that what we see as the plot on your app is more about drawing you to come see it. But you know, how interesting is that? We want people to come and join us in the spiritual journey that we're taking in the church. So why not learn to write that kind of copy that, if you put it on your website, your Facebook page, would help people know what is the spiritual journey that we're on, and how does it apply to your life? In the book, I use an example of a log line from a series that we created in the Worship Design Studio called Risky Business, right? Let's see if I can find that quickly. All right. Here's the synopsis. If Jesus had lived in our day, the risk assessment folks would surely have rejected his application for life insurance. Time and again, he put himself in positions of risk, saying things that upset the rule keepers, eating with people not fit for good company, and putting himself in harm's way as he rubbed elbows with the sick and unclean. It seems the message was that the reign of God requires a bit of risky business. Are we willing to take risks for love and justice? What price do we pay by playing it safe? So in that synopsis, what you want to do is, what's the main message we're focusing on, right? So I'm giving you some examples of how Jesus' life and ministry was risky. And then I'm asking a couple of provocative questions that connect it to our real life stories. And that is, what is the risk of doing this ministry, but what is the risk of playing it safe, right? And of course, we'll dig into that in the series, where perhaps the answer is the risk of playing it safe is the very transformation of our lives, our relationships, and of the world. And God knows our world needs transformation. And so who are we as the church, and how do we stand up for love and justice? So that's what a synopsis, what I call a synopsis, what a screenwriter calls a log line, is doing, is inviting us into the journey and saying, what does this have to do with my life? I always ask myself when I'm writing a synopsis, if I went to a church's website and I saw these few sentences, would it intrigue me enough to say, you know what, let me go check that out? Yeah, I have these questions about who are we as a society, and how are we going to survive, and what risk is there for standing up for those who don't have a voice. These are all questions I'm dealing with in my life and in the world right now. Maybe the church has something to say about that, right? So it's a way of getting the word out. Call it evangelism, call it publicity, call it connecting with people where they are. But that's what I get at as the first step in the book, in chapter 1, about conceptualizing the story. What is that story we're going to tell, and how does it connect with people? Okay, friends, I am going to open this up to folks. Any questions? It can be about what I just talked about or not. It can be questions that have to do with the book or not. Let's keep it to worship, right? But I'm just wondering, what questions do you have? What's going on at your churches that you'd just like to brainstorm about with me? Go ahead and put those in the chat box. We've got enough people on here today that I think it might be difficult to actually have you ask them in person, but okay. Mary Louise says, this summer I'm preaching on Luke. I wonder about this Sunday's Mary and Martha story. So what are you wondering, Mary Louise? Are you trying to just conceptualize how that will happen? I want to ask you, I love this idea of focusing on a book in the Bible during a set period of time. One of the things that I suggest to folks is that if it's, let's say, on Luke, what is the thread? What is the common question or the common message that Luke is getting at that could actually help us to connect the pieces, rather than just saying, I'm doing Luke this summer and then just do one-hit wonders? Is there a way to connect those in some shorter series, like monthly series that are all based on Luke? And when when you do that, what I find is that it's easier to figure out how to frame that message rather than sort of starting from scratch on each story. Mary Louise says, how to bring in more elements than words to make this sensory rich. So yeah, what I would do is, right away a song came to mind, Mary, Don't You Weep, and thinking about even if I had to use a recording because perhaps my pianist or my choir or whomever doesn't really know how to do that, how could I weave that in my sermon? How could I have little clips of that fade in and out and use that as kind of a thread throughout my sermon? Mary, don't you weep. Martha, don't you moan. There's a lot of moaning and weeping going on in the world these days. And perhaps the seminal question is, how are we spending our time? How are we spending our effort? And maybe using that, little clips of that, audio clips of that coming in and out, and then asking the questions about what do we weep in these days? And how can our weeping turn into action? Right? So I'm always going to think about what song could I use that would help me give a specific focus. Describe getting started with the plan ahead concept while still producing the one-hit wonders in the meantime. Yes, Steve, that's a great, great question. So you just have to do it. Just do it. I would suggest that if you've never done a plan ahead model, that you pick a season perhaps like Advent, where already the congregation has this super sense of it being a special time frame. And then in September-ish, October-ish, begin to plan that using the plan ahead model that I describe in the book, while you're continuing your one-hit wonders. It's just going to be a little bit hard for a little while, but let me suggest this to you. I am going to be, like I did for Lent this past Lent, I'm going to be doing a fully scripted Advent series as well. Some of you may have done Gifts of the Dark Wood that I did for Lent. I'm going to be also doing a fully scripted Advent series. So you could give yourself a little jump start in this by using some of our series to start with, which means you don't have to start from scratch, right? It means that you get a sense of the layering, you get a sense of the process, you get a sense of getting people on board without having to come up with all the material. Many people have joined the Worship Design Studio where we have 9 years worth of worship series in there. Use this as a way to get into this plan ahead thing. Use some of our worship series so that you're not working so hard, that we jumpstart you into it until you get into that rhythm. In September, 1st of September, I will be doing a series of webinar sessions called Reboot Your Worship. I talk a little bit about it in the last chapter of the book. And with that, I always do that to get ready for Advent and for Lent. And what I do is I literally walk you through the process, the plan ahead process, so that you can have some very concrete tasks that you're doing every week of this 40-day reboot. And it's like a reboot. It's like boot camp, right? When you're trying to jumpstart your health and getting yourself back into healthy things, it's going to hurt for a little while, but then you're so glad you did it because it all becomes easier. So the Reboot Your Worship will start the 1st of September. If you are on our list, you'll know about it. Nancy says Reboot last year was amazing. I highly recommend it. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so. Let me back up here. What's a good number of people to have on a worship team? Okay, let's talk about this. Next month, I'm going to really talk about the second chapter, which is gathering the team. But suffice it to say that what I want you to do is kind of blow up your traditional ideas about what a worship team is. All right? And this is why. So often, we think that a worship team or a worship committee is a group of people that you've asked to serve for an entire year. That's kind of the old model of teams. And it's very hard to do that these days, right? I'm sure all of you have experienced this. very difficult to get people to commit to a year-long thing. People are super busy. And so I want you to blow up that idea. All right. So in the book, I talk about 3 levels of a team. One is the core team. These are the people who are working on worship all the time. It's staff who's supposed to be working on worship all the time, and it's volunteers who do have the time and want to work on the worship team all year long. That's the core team. But then you're going to perhaps ask a couple of people to be just on a team for the series, just for the series. There's so many great things about this. It gets more people involved, sort of rotating in and out. It gets new and fresh energy to the core team, so that it just helps us energetically. It helps us to have new people on the team. So there's many good reasons to do this. But one of the main reasons is because people then can volunteer for a shorter amount of time. So let's say that you are a small church. Now, what do I mean by small? That's different in different parts of the country. Let's use a kind of less than 100 in worship church. You might have a core team that's pastor, a music person, maybe part-time or full-time, and you may have like a worship chair person, somebody who has committed to a year long. Let's say you have 3, all right? So let's say that for the Advent series, you want to add maybe 3 others, 6 people. That's a great number to have on a team. All right, so you might have somebody who is an HGTV addict who loves to arrange things in their home. They love, you go over to their house for dinner and they've got a centerpiece. They've gone to extra efforts to make the place look lovely. You want to invite them to come and do something visually for the series. Perhaps you're just starting on that. And so you're going to invite them in. You're going to have them read the chapter on the visual arts from the book. If you're a member of the Worship Design Studio, you're going to have them watch a couple of webinars where I really go into that. And boom, they see how they can take their love of decorating their house and bring it in and do a visual installation as part of worship. Perhaps you have somebody in the choir who, is really loves music. And you ask them to sit with the accompanist or the music director, whatever you have, after church one day and just comb through the hymnal, comb through songs, depending on what tradition you're in, and find all the songs you can find that are about light. Because for your Advent series, you're going to be, the theme is moving toward the light or something. I'm just making that up. And so you just have them comb through and just make a list of everything, all the songs they can think of about light. That would be a wonderful contribution to you as you sit down later and decide how are we putting it together. You get to the script writing phase, and here you have a whole list of possible songs that you could use. That's a great, great contribution. And it didn't take very much time, and it didn't take somebody who was coming to weekly meetings. Right? It was a specific task. Now, I'm using a small church as an example right now because I did get somebody who sent me an email for the webinar that said, I'm in a very small church. It's hard for me to get team members. I don't really know how to put together a worship team. So I'm starting with this very simple example because what I want you to see is that it doesn't take a large church, a large budget, to actually get some people involved in very helpful ways. So this is an example of beginning to build a team, beginning to have people on a worship team. Debbie, your question about what's a good number of people, it depends on the size of your congregation. But just even having 3 core members and 3 extra team members for the series is a great number of people. You don't want it to get too big, and too big would be when you don't have enough for people to do. Now, the third tier of participation, I talked about the core team, the series team, and then the third level of participation I call the extended team member. The extended team member is somebody who has a skill that you need, right? So we need a manger for Christmas Eve service, and a carpenter who can make a manger. You give them the dimensions it needs to be, and they do it. That's an extended team member. That's somebody who has a skill that maybe is involved in one part of the process, but they're still part of the worship team. So do you see how we're reconfiguring our understanding of what a worship team is? Doesn't have to be people who are doing things all the time. All right, how do you deal with the schizophrenia of preaching the current series, finalizing details for the next series while you're brainstorming for the one after that? Yay! Good question. Wonderful question. Here's the thing. Every part of what you described is a different kind of process in the brain. And this is why I suggest you start the production of one series at least 8 weeks before, because what that allows you to do is to be using the right part of your brain for brainstorming, the right side of your brain, the creative part, the part that says, oh, the sky's the limit, right? In the brainstorming part, you do not want to put any limitations on the ideas. And you want other people to be helping you in this part of the process. That is so key. Because if you, as pastor, are trying to do all of these things all yourself, you cannot sustain it. You will become schizophrenic. It will feel stressful to you. But in the brainstorming part of this of the process, if you really are getting people to help you, you've said to the kid that's always on the computer, you know what? Our next series is about light. Here's a list of 4 royalty-free, permission-given sites for pictures. Would you look in these 4 and use these keywords? Light, candle, lighthouse. Give them some keywords. And then have them just grab pictures for you. Put them in a folder, right? That's brainstorming. And then all you've done is you've come up with the keywords. You've given them, empowered them to go to the right place, so they're using, things you can actually use and not get in trouble for using because you didn't have permission. And you've empowered that person to just grab pictures. You haven't told them, oh, these pictures, you haven't put any limits on them. In other words, you just say, grab a bunch of pictures, right? You could do that if you did that with 2 or 3 youth who are on their computer all the time anyway, they can get that done in no time flat, right? So you've got to keep giving it away, empowering people. Find somebody, if you've decided that you want in that Advent series on light to have some poetry every week. Maybe that's something that you've brainstormed that you'd like. During that resource gathering phase, the brainstorming resource gathering phase, somebody who can search for poetry that has light in it, right? And you want them to pull more than just 4 Sundays or 5 Sundays, including Christmas Eve or the Sunday after Christmas. Although this year, Sunday is, we've gotten another year where Christmas Day is on a Sunday. Woohoo! Aren't we excited? But at any rate, you get them to pull more things than you can use, because then you can, at the time of script writing, you can discern which ones are going to be right. So when you are in that phase, yes, you're preaching every Sunday, but that's a different part of the brain, right? And so if you have cleared the decks week in and week out of all the other pieces of the creative process for the series that you're on, then hopefully all you're doing is tweaking the script and printing out the worship guide, which is what I call a bulletin, and you're writing your sermon. So that's the whole idea: is you clear the deck of the creative process, except for that on the series that you're on. You have other people helping you with the brainstorming, so that you're not doing all of that. And then you've got 2 different things going on in 2 different modes. I hope that's helpful. Okay, how will I be able to share this discussion with my team and your book? Can we download the discussion from YouTube? Will we know the day and time of each webinar for the different chapters? Yes. Thank you, Christmas, for asking that. On marciamcfee.com, you'll go to events and online events, and we have all the dates for all the webinars. They'll always be at the same time, 10 a.m. Pacific, etc. I will be sequentially going through the chapters, and I will always upload the recording to my YouTube channel so that you can watch it later if you couldn't be on live. All right. How do we get on the list for the reboot in September? You can get on my mailing list by going to marciamcfee.com. I have that up on the screen right now, marciamcfee.com, and that's your gateway into everything. You'll see on there a free 6-week Jumpstart course, and when you click on that and give us your email, you'll get 6 weeks of articles, and also you'll be on the email list. So that's the way to get on. All right. Do you have a series dealing with the anxiety and fear surrounding the current issues we're facing now? Isolationism, fear of others, untrusting the other. Absolutely. There are several series in the Worship Design Studio that deal with our relationship to our neighbors. Who is my neighbor? One of them right now, interestingly enough, those of you who are using the current one called The Outsiders, it's it's amazing how those things happen. How do we identify people who are inside and outside? We have one coming up this fall that will dovetail nicely. It's also a stewardship focus, but it's more than just money. It's stewardship of our relationships, of the planet, of many things. Another one called Draw the Circle Wide is about our relationships to one another. And so there's several, if you look in the Worship Design Studio, several series that address these kinds of things. And like all of our series in the Worship Design Studio, we give you a lot of ideas for every Sunday in all the worship arts. And then you take what's happening right now in the world and you connect those themes and those ideas to what's happening currently. So, all right. Any other questions? I want to encourage you, not just the big questions, but also if you have a specific question about what's going on at your church. Like we have a volunteer who wants to work with our team, but we've got a team who doesn't want new people. I'm just making this up, right? That's never happened in the church. Just kidding. And so think about those specific things as well. And every month, feel free to, like I said, email me at marcia@marciamcfee.com, those things that you'd like for me to address the next time, or just come online with those kind of questions. I really want these webinars to just, be useful to you. Really, I'm serious. Come on and consider it a little mini consult. I'd love to talk with you about what's actually going on at your church. And that's what these are for, just sort of opening it up to what would help you. All right, Nancy says we're doing an 8-week session on the Lord's Prayer. Nice. Suggestions for kinesthetic ideas during the series, as you did in Darkwood. Yeah. So we have in Worship Design Studio, we have a series based on the Lord's Prayer. I actually have a Lord's Prayer set of movements that is in my first book called The Worship Workshop. And if you email me, Nancy, I'd be happy to send that along to you. But it's wonderful to do in a children's sermon, perhaps, and then have the whole congregation do it. It's with a partner, and it's just hand movements for the whole prayer. And what it does is it really helps us to remember the meaning of those words and how much that prayer is about relationship. So always thinking about how can we get our bodies involved. Different prayer postures. The ancient church prayed with their arms in the orans position, with them raised like this. So you might one Sunday invite people to say the Lord's Prayer with their hands in this ancient Christian posture for prayer. Your congregation might be familiar with it just because they've seen you do it as a pastor at the table, not knowing that in the early church, whenever there was prayer, people raised their hands in that way. And it's important, I think, when you're asking people to do something like that, to ground it historically, especially if you're a church where if you raise your hands, people are going to be like, oh my gosh, we've gone Pentecostal, So you might want to ground it in that history. Would be a really great idea. Use the word orans for it. But other prayer postures, bowing our head and closing our eyes is a very specific prayer posture So you might play with different ways to say that. Say it, have the congregation turn and face each other across the aisle and say it to one another. What does it mean when you say, looking into the eyes of another person, forgive us, right, as we forgive others? That could be quite a powerful thing to do. What does that mean to actually say that when looking in the eyes of another? That makes it really personal. It's not just something we rattle off, but it's personal, it's deep, right? So always thinking about those embodiment things, and that's the dramatic arts chapter in the book. How can we embody that which we proclaim, that brings that message alive? All right. We are moving to a less than full-time pastor, so anxiety is very high. Any sermon series ideas regarding trust and faith? Oh, yes. There's one series that I want to point you to in the worship design studio called Moving Out of Scare City. So that's, of course, a play on words. Scare City, in the title, it's 2 words, but also it means scarcity, right? So what does it mean to live in the land of God's abundance, to understand and believe that God has abundance in store for us, and living out of that belief rather than the belief in scarcity and living out of fear? How do we live out of hope? That's a radical notion in our day. I think especially going into the fall where we have elections happening. Hello. I really hope a lot of people use this series, Moving Out of Scarcity, in the fall, because I think people really are yearning for a message of hope rather than the message of fear. I think a lot of our politics is banking on people being afraid, on whatever side you're on. And so what is the church's response? What is the message of the gospel in the midst of that? So that's one series in the Worship Design Studio I would recommend to you around trust and faith. There's also another one based on a wonderful book by a couple of chaplains. And this is one that I created a long time ago. So here I am trying to think of the name of it. I believe it's in fall series. The leading causes of life, something like that. You know how we talk about the leading causes of death? These chaplains wrote a book about what are the leading causes of life. What have they seen in patients? That's the difference between somebody who flounders and somebody who flourishes, even in the midst of very severe health crises. And so that could be a good one as well. All right. So Nancy says, oh yeah, you're talking, Nancy, about the Lord's Prayer. Would you use that same thing every week? No, actually I wouldn't. I would use different, going back to the embodiment thing for Lord's Prayer, I would do different ones, like having different postures for, and the children's time, if you do that, that's a wonderful way of incrementally bringing the congregation into a more embodied experience. Inviting the children to do it and inviting the the adults to do it with the children. That's a great way to gently invite people into it. But if you did go to the dark wood, your congregation is already on the road to being more embodied and more participatory. Friends, that's our hour. Thank you so much for these great questions. I love this. So I hope to see you month after month on here. Tell others about the book. Tell others about the webinars. Hopefully you will consider coming to one of the planning retreats in late August, September, and October. We have them in 3 different places, 3 different times. If you are just beginning this journey of planning together, planning ahead, planning series, coming to one of these retreats will seriously turbo boost you into a more creative and more participatory kind of designing. And so I really want to encourage you to consider doing that. You can go to marciamcfee.com to find out more details about those planning retreats. I can tell you they are filling up fast. They always do. So especially the first one, which is in Kennebunkport, that's almost full. So don't delay. Take a look at that. Consider coming. You can get the link to to Amazon to buying the book if you haven't already bought the book at thinklikeafilmmaker.com. You can also buy it from us. We give a discount for multiple copies. So if you're considering buying the book for your team so you can do a study through it together, then check out that possibility. But Amazon has a really great rate right now. So, how can I compete with that? Check out that at thinklikeafilmmaker.com. Also, those of you who have started to read the book, you'll notice throughout the book, I have these little sidebars here that says read, like this one is in the verbal arts chapter, and I'm talking about an example of a sermon. And then I say read the whole sermon at thinklikeafilmmaker.com. Basically, at thinklikeafilmmaker.com, there is a sign-up form that will then send you an email with a link to all these bonus materials. I mean, tons of them, friends. When you buy the book, you don't just buy the book, you're buying an entire website full of resources. Be sure that as you're reading that book, you are going to those resources because I just couldn't fit all of that in one book, right? So I can't help myself. I want the learning to be interactive. And so go to thinklikeafilmmaker.com, fill out that form, and it will send you an email that has links to all of the bonus materials for every chapter. So friends, thank you so much for being with me. I'll see you next month. And again, if you are not connected to us via email and want to be on the email list, you can do that at marciamcfee.com. There is a little button there that says get a free 6-week jumpstart series of articles. There you can add your name and get on our list so that you can find out when all of these retreats and reboot webinars, that kind of thing. I am here to resource you, to teach you in all the different ways that I can. So I love to do that live. I love to do it via the internet. I love to do that via the Worship Design Studio, where you have all these many years of resources at your fingertips. We want to train your team. We want to help you to have really good, unforgettable, sensory-rich worship Sunday after Sunday. Let us help you, because it's a big job, because Sunday comes around every week. And I know that there's a lot of stress involved with that. So let us help you have more vibrancy both in your worship and in your life. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.